Hey everybody, welcome back to my coverage of the PogChamps 3 tournament, and man, this match is exciting. Ludwig versus Sardoche, the first semifinals match in the championship bracket, and man, the first game was wild, this game is wild too. If you missed the first game, check it in the info card up there, and Ludwig needs to win this game in order to take us to a tiebreaker. Let's see what happened. He does have the white pieces, though Sardoche is that huge rating favorite by a lot. Can Ludwig get the upset here and take us to a tiebreaker? Let's find out. We have e4 from Ludwig and c5 from Sardoche, the Sicilian defense. C3 from Ludwig, the Alpine Sicilian, or the C3 Sicilian as it's sometimes called. And here we've seen other PogChamps competitors play d6, going for like a Nadorf setup or like an accelerated dragon setup or something like that, which is not the best response to the Alpine Sicilian, but we see Sardoche play knight f6, which is a very good response to the Alpine Sicilian in my opinion. And we have e5 now from Ludwig, which is the best continuation from white as well. We have knight d5 now and d4, c takes d4, c takes d4, and both players are playing fantastically so far. We have d6 now from Sardoche and knight to f3 from Ludwig. Knight c6 continuing to develop, and bishop b5. And this bishop b5 move is actually a mistake from Ludwig because of the move queen to a5 check, and this is a fork on the king and the bishop. So here you have to play knight to c3, and normally this would be fine as your knight defends your bishop. However, you can remove this defender with this knight, with knight takes c6. And so here, if you simply take this back normally, you lose your bishop. So first you have to trade your bishop with bishop takes c6. And it looks fine because you're not losing your bishop. But then after white recaptures your knight, you realize that you're also losing this pawn here. So queen takes c3 and bishop d2. And black will be up a pawn and have a very nice position. So yeah, so Sardoche could have won a pawn here after this bishop a5 move. But instead, he simply plays a6. We have queen a4 from Ludwig, which is really tricky. His idea is you can't take my bishop now because your pawn is pinned to your rook. But this isn't the best for... Black actually has a couple moves he can play there, or they can play here. In the game, Sardoche played bishop d7, and this is basically saying, okay, now my rook's defended, and I am threatening to take your bishop. So this is basically gaining a tempo on the bishop, and the bishop either has to move again or white has to give up this bishop pair. But here, black can actually take this bishop, and I just want to show you guys this line really quickly. A takes b5, and white obviously has to accept the rook, otherwise they'll be down a piece for nothing. And now d takes e5 from white. If we have knight takes e5, then there's knight takes d4, now threatening this fork on c2, so white has to castle to get out of it. And now black can play f6, kicking this knight away, knight to f3, and now we can play knight to c2, trapping the rook in the corner. And black will regain their exchange and be a pawn up, and white's queen could be out of play later on. They have weakened their king side a bit, but overall I think this position is going to be better than black, especially if they can escape with their knight. Then they will simply be, there'll just be a lot of material up. I can't count right now, but black, that would be a very good position for black. They may lose the knight in the corner, but you know, they're still up a pawn. And okay, I already covered it. But in the game, we've got bishop d7 from Sardoche, and here Ludwig realizes he needs to move his bishop, so we have bishop takes c6 and bishop takes c6, now hitting the queen. Ludwig moves to b3 with his queen, and overall, black has got a very nice start to the game. White, an okay start. It's not losing yet, but black is definitely the one doing better here. We have knight to c7 by Sardoche. Queen to b6, I think, would have been a more active move, developing a new piece instead of retreating a piece that has already been developed. Just much more principled. But we have knight to c7 instead. I'm not sure exactly what Sardoche's plan with this knight is, but maybe we'll see him reroute it somewhere else later on. We have castles now from Ludwig and bishop takes f3, and this is definitely a positional mistake from Sardoche. You don't want to be giving up this bishop pair for nothing. And also after queen takes f3, now this b pawn is weak, so you have to do something about that, which he defends with rook to b8. Maybe b5 would have been better, but we have rook to b8. And now we have bishop to f4 from Ludwig. We have e6 from Sardoche. looking to develop this bishop and get castled, and now rook to d1. Ludwig getting his rook into the game. We have d5 from Sardoche and a3 from Ludwig. Much more principled would have been simply developing your last piece. You could get this rook to this open file and continue. This a3 move doesn't really do much, in my opinion, but we have a3 anyway. We now have bishop e7 from Sardoche. It's really the only square this bishop can go to, and queen to g3 from Ludwig. And here you got a castle as black, just defending your pawn. And if bishop to h3, then there is knight to e8, defending this g7 square. So you don't have to give up the exchange here with g6, but I think Sardoche missed this knight to e8 move, and he was worried about castling because he thought that he would have to play g6 here and lose the exchange. So instead of castling, Sardoche plays b5, which is definitely not the way to go. If you're afraid of, this bishop h6, you could even play king to f8 and then defend this spot with your rook. I mean, king to f8 might even be better than castling in this position. It may seem weird, but king to f8 is the new castling, as they say at the grandmaster level. Okay, but Sardoche is not a grandmaster. He didn't castle. He didn't play king f8. He played b5 instead, and now this just allows Ludwig to take this g7 pawn, which he should definitely do. And here black actually has to play king d7, which is like to defend their rook, which is super weird. Because if you play rook to f8 here, then you hang your h pawn. So maybe Ludwig was afraid of this because he was afraid of the half-open g-file and the queen aligned with the king. But this pawn is definitely takeable, and you definitely should take it. Black's king is going to be exposed for the rest of the game and will have no safety if you take this pawn. So definitely a missed opportunity here for Ludwig because he did not go for this. He instead played b4, and now this allows Sardoche to get back into the game. Once again, he's got a castle or even play king f8 here. But instead, he plays g5. And this is just not a very good move. Pushing your kingside pawns, and your king is not going to be safe for the rest of your game. You've pushed your pawns in the center, you've pushed your pawns on the queen side and exchanged the c pawn, and now you've pushed your pawns on the king side. So where is your king going, basically? You cannot take this pawn though, as it has 2 attackers and 2 defenders. So Ludwig rightfully backs his bishop up to e3, and now we have f5, and this is another mistake. You're just exposing your king even more. E takes f6 from Ludwig, and just opening up the center, and look at how exposed this king is. I mean, white's going to get a rook to the e file, hop a knight into c5 maybe, and this is going to be a really tough game for black. So Ludwig unfortunately didn't go for this en passant move, though he played f4 himself. Don't know if he forgot about the en passant rule or if he just didn't think it was worth going. But f4 definitely not the way you want to go. When your opponent exposes their king like this, you want to open up the position, not close it down. And this gives the opportunity for Sardoche to close the position with g4, and it's like, now how are you going to get an attack going? This bishop is doing nothing. Your queen is not going to get in here. Can't get in through h3, can't get in through h4, and black's king safety is much less of a liability now that the position is closed. So Sardoche definitely could have gotten back into the game with g5, but he held the tension and played h6, which is a fine move as well. But it's just not as clean as g4 in my opinion. The game continues. We have queen to h3 and now king to d7. Sardoche's king running from this queen h5 check. We have queen back to f3 now, and g takes f4, opening this g file, so Sardoche hoping to get some counterplay against white's king. We have bishop takes f4 and bishop g5, and here you should just continue development as white, knight to d2, look to come to b3, maybe c5 later. This hole is really juicy as white. I would love to get a knight there, but Ludwig plays bishop to d2 instead, and here Sardoche plays bishop takes d2, and this is definitely not something that you're going to want to do. You're basically helping your opponent develop, and yeah, when Ludwig put this bishop on d2, now his knight can't come to d2, which is the square it wants to go to, because it can't do anything on c3 here. It's looking at squares that are all defended by pawns, and it can't come to a3, so it really needs to come to d2 so it can come to b3 later, and then it can do stuff on c5 and a5. So when you take this, not only are you helping your opponent develop, but yeah, this is the main thing. I thought I had something else to say, but I guess I don't. We have queen g5 now from Sardoche, and queen to c3 from Ludwig. Rook a to c1, I think, would have been better. Just getting that rook on the open file, because now you should also leave your queen defending your king side, because now this gives Sardoche the opportunity to put his rook on the g file, which he does, now aiming on this g2 square, and you either have to bring your queen back over there or play g3 and induce a weakness on your king. So Ludwig decides to play this g3 move, which is fine, because otherwise you would have had to move the queen back over there, and seeing as Ludwig just moved it to c3, I think he's got other plans for his queen. And your queen can always come right back over here if she's needed. So g3, I think, is fine here. We have rook b to c8 now, aligning with this queen, and now knight to f3 from Ludwig, hitting that queen. Sardoche saves his queen with queen to g4, and now we have queen to e3. And this is a huge mistake by Ludwig, because it allows this f4 move, forking the queen and the g-pawn. And you cannot take this because the pawn is pinned to your king. And you can't even take this with your queen, because if you take with your queen, then simply queen takes f4, and you still can't take this queen because the pawn is still pinned to your king. So this would lose a queen. So here Ludwig has to play queen f2, and now black is just ripping open white's king side. F takes g3 and h takes g3, and black is getting that counterplay. Now it's white's king that exposed instead of black's king, so black is definitely winning here. Here Sardoche played queen takes g3, which wins a pawn, as there were 2 attackers and only 1 defender. However, queen to h3 is definitely a much stronger move, also much harder to find though, and the reasoning is you can't defend this pawn again as white, and then you can take with your rook, double up on the g file, just get your rook into the game. And here I don't really see a good defense as white. You may have to give up the queen, or at the very least give up the knight, but yeah, I really don't see a defense for white here for rook takes g3. So yeah, queen to h3 would have just been winning on the spot for Sardoche, but we have queen takes g3, which wins a pawn, and after queen takes g3, rook takes g3, and king to f2, now we're going into this rook and double rook and knight endgame, where black has this passed h pawn. So black is still obviously better here, but it could have been lights out right there. And it's not looking good for Ludwig so far, because black is just up a pawn here, and these pawns, you're not going to have any pawn breaks here, and there are only pawns on one side of the board really for you. So you have to win this here, and it's looking less and less good for Ludwig here. But who knows? Anything can happen. We have rook c to g8 from Sardoche, and you have to contest this g file. As much as you do not want to trade, you can't let black's rooks get in here. So Ludwig does play rook g1 correctly, and we have rook takes g1 and knight takes g1. Now we have king to e7 from Sardoche and rook to c1. Ludwig getting his rook on this open file. Really, you have to come back to d7 on your king. I think defending the c file with your king and then playing on the g and f and h files with your rook is the way to go here as black. So yeah, this king to e7 move by Sardoche on the last move maybe wasn't the best. And Sardoche probably also didn't want to admit this by moving back. That's just something that's very hard to do psychologically. But he plays knight to e8 instead, and now this allows white's rook to infiltrate this c file. So, and also you're blocking your rook, so your rook can't even help out to defend. So white does play rook to c6, which is definitely the correct move, and it looks like white is going to be picking up this a pawn. So Ludwig may be getting back into the game here. We have rook to f8 check and knight to f3 blocking the check. h5 Sardoche pushing that past h pawn, and now rook takes a6. Ludwig picks up the a pawn. We have h4 pushing that pawn even further, and now rook to a7. check from Ludwig. We have king to d8, and now this allows Ludwig to come over here and pick up the h pawn as well, and you won't be able to defend this as black. So we have rook to h7 and rook to f4, rook to f4, and rook takes h4, x-ray defending this d pawn. It was already defended by the knight, but now white is up a pawn, and white has got the winning chances here. They've got their pawns more advanced, the more active king, the more active knight. So white definitely has the winning chances now, and the tables have turned. But Sardoche only needs a draw to win the match, so if he can hold a draw, he will win the match. We have rook takes h4 and knight takes h4, and even though white is up a pawn, the position is very locked still, and with pawns on only one side of the board, it might be easy for black to draw this, but we'll just have to see. We have knight to c7, black defends all of his pawns with his knight, and now knight to g6, king to d7, and king to e3. And here as black, what you have to do is you have to reroute this knight to c5. You know, white wanted to route his knight to c5 earlier in the game. Now as black, you have to route your knight to c4 and basically pressure this a pawn. And basically as black, what you want to do here is defend your e pawn with your king and pressure this a pawn with your knight, and so white's king can never come around and help attack this e-pawn. And that's how you hold this draw here. So in order to do that, you have to play knight to a8, which looks like a really crazy move to play. Especially, it's hard to find this move if you're a beginner and you're not looking for these ideas. Sometimes it can be really hard to find these knight maneuvers as a beginner, or just piece maneuvers in general. So yeah, this is black's plan. This is the plan black has to go for. And you just don't think about putting your knight in a corner, really ever. So we have king to c6 from Sardoche, and now this is actually winning for Ludwig. So let's see if he can convert this. We have king to d3, a bit of king shuffling here. We have king to b6, king to e3. Neither player, I think neither player really knows what their plan should be. Both running a little low on time though, so that could have something to do with it. We have king c6 now and king to f4, king d7 and king to g5. Now white brings their king in, and it's too late for black to save this position here because they will be in zugzwang in a few moves. So king to e8 and king to f6, king d7, and now knight f8 check, and black can not stay in contact with this pawn. The king takes away the e7 square and the pawn takes away the d6 square. So we have king to e8, and now white picks up this e-pawn, and this is definitely going to be winning for white. Here, your best try as black is keep the knights on the board. You have to keep the knights on the board with something. You got to play knight a6 or knight a8 here, because if you trade knights, knight takes e6, king takes e6, then it's just you move your king one way and king to f7. This pawn, nothing can stop this pawn. So you have to try to keep the knights on the board, and I don't know, maybe go for something or sack your knight for a pawn or something like that. But you can't trade knights here, which Sardoche does in the game. So he plays knight takes e6, king takes e6, and now once again, after this king to d8, we can simply see king to f7, and nothing can stop this pawn from promoting. So we do have king d8 in the game, but instead of playing king to f7, which I think would have been the cleanest win, we have king takes d5, which is totally fine too. Now you have these two connected passed pawns. It's just not the fastest win, but it still totally wins. So we have king to d7 and king c5 now, king to e6 and king takes b5, king to d5, and after Sardoche played king to d5, he resigned because he realized that there was nothing he can do. He was down 4 pawns. He only had a king left. So yeah, Ludwig takes the second game in a crazy turn of events. I really would not have thought Ludwig could take this game and win it after that queen trade. But yeah, lots of chances for both players in this game. Really wild game. This may be my favorite PogChamps game that we've had so far. So we will be going to a tiebreaker in this first semifinals match. And can Ludwig take down Sardoche, arguably the favorite to win the entire tournament? Let's find out, or we don't know. We're just going to have to find out in the tiebreaker game. So click on the video on the left side of the screen to check out that tiebreaker game, and check out my PogChamps 3 playlist up there. I don't think I have anything else to say about this game, so thank you for watching. I love you guys. See you in the tiebreaker game, and I'll see you next time.